As we look at prophecies and the prophetic, here are some suggestions for exploring this yourself. There are really two parts to it: listening to God and sharing what God says with others. And the listening to God piece is something that many people struggle with. They have heard people say that God is a communicating God, but they don't have any experience of hearing God speak to them. And so it seems as though it is for other people, nothing to do with them. But Paul, in 1 Corinthians 14, 1-4, encourages the believers to eagerly desire spiritual gifts, and particularly prophecy, and wants all of them to be engaged in speaking prophetically. So let's not give up, but see this as an opportunity to draw closer to God and experience something new from him. Here are 3 things that might help: having a right relationship with God, being intentional about hearing from God, and being open to how God speaks. In relationships with other people, we've probably all known times where there was a breakdown in relationship, and how this makes talking together so much more difficult. So let's be prepared to examine ourselves and see if there is anything in our relationship with God that is damaged and needs to be repaired. And if so, let's be willing to bring that to God, to confess any sin, and to seek a restored relationship. And if we need help with that, let's speak to someone we trust who can help us on that journey. And I don't want to suggest that if you haven't heard God speaking, it is because there is a problem in your relationship with him. That could just add a sense of guilt. But I did want to raise it as something to consider. And it's good for each of us to regularly take time to think and reflect on our relationship with God and how it is going. And while God can break in and speak in any situation, it's often important for us to be really intentional about listening to him, to make space for uninterrupted time with him, to try and get away from distractions, to be really focused on him and open to what he wants to reveal to us. For some of us, that will be easier than for others, depending on our situation. And we shouldn't feel guilty if we find that difficult to manage. But let's try and find at least some time alone where we can listen to God and not just use that time to speak to him. And let's recognize that God speaks to people through many different means. For some, it will be when reading the Bible. For others, it will be when praying. For others, it will be when walking and enjoying God's creation. For others, it will be when they're in the shower or driving their car, and so on. You may hear something very like an audible voice. You might get an impression of something. You might see something in the Bible you haven't seen before. God can speak in many different ways. And let's be ready to take on board whatever he communicates to us, however he does it. And particularly when taking first steps in hearing from God, it can be helpful to check what we think we have heard with someone else. Life groups are a great place to do this. Or you could do this with a friend you trust. Let's encourage each other to share what we think God is saying and to get guidance from others as to whether this is actually God speaking or not. This can help us discount things that are not from God and build our confidence in hearing correctly from him. And we need to remember that prophecies are given for the benefit of someone else. So when we believe we've heard something from God for someone else, and if appropriate, when we tested it with others, let's have the confidence and courage to share that with someone else, whether that's an individual, a small group, or the whole church. And before we share that with someone else, let's just take time for a quick check. Paul in 1 Corinthians 14 verse 3 says that prophecy is to strengthen, to encourage, and to comfort. Is what we're going to say to someone going to achieve one of these things? If so, let's share it with them. Let's do this gently, recognizing that the person receiving it needs time to reflect on it and to see if they believe it is God's word for them. So let's avoid language like God has said, and instead use language like, I believe that God has given me something for you to consider. And let's keep a record of what we believe God is saying to us and when we share it with someone else. Let's see what happens as a result of that, as we grow in confidence and the use of this wonderful gift God has for his people.